And joining us up here is Lee Camp, who is professor at Haslip School of Theology, an interviewer, a teacher of ethics, and an interviewer whose skill, I think, rivals Bill Moyer, who embodies the advice that his hero, St. Francis, employs, which is to seek first to understand before he seeks to be understood. And so now to interview Walter Brueggemann, Lee Camp.
Thank you, good Professor Fleer. I don't know what's harder, to follow David Fleer's introductions or to interview Walter Brueggemann after a Walter Brueggemann lecture. I worked really hard on this introduction, but after Fleer's introduction earlier, we don't need that. We'll move on. The one thing I did want to note is that between the time I read one paragraph online that said you had written 60 books, I read on the back of a book that came out just this year that you had written 70 books. And I think the most important question I wanted to ask is, have you read all of your books?
Only the ones that are interesting, which is a limited number.
In my experience, those of us who are in teaching, preaching, ministry, we have somewhere along the way some sort of formative experience, some sort of or series of formative experiences where it's almost like we end up doing this, sometimes even against our will. And so I was wondering, tonight I wanted to kind of tell you, we won't stay too long on that, but I kind of want to take an autobiographical kind of look at some of your life experiences and ask first, can you identify certain fundamentally important experiences you had as a child that kind of led you to where you have gone in your work?
Well, I grew up in Nebraska and Kansas in an intensely church family. The church was really the horizon of my life. And my father was a kind of a mentor to younger pastors who were around him, so that younger pastors were in our house all the time. And I found them to be the most winsome and attractive and clever people that I could have imagined. And I think that was a huge magnet for me. My family says that when I was in seminary, the first year I had to do field education in a settlement house downtown in St. Louis, and my assignment was to run a club for 7-year-old girls. And my family judges it. That's why I went to graduate school, so I didn't have to do that anymore. I went to church summer camp for a number of years, and that was a compelling vocational force in my life. It's hard for me to distinguish the parts of that churchy context, all of which came together vocationally for me.
It would be a wonder to know for how many people church camp has had such a formative influence.
Yeah.
At what point then, so you go into seminary, and at what point do you begin to be captured by the biblical prophets? When do you snap onto that and say, there's something I've got to keep following there?
Well, I think my seminary teachers, the best teachers I had were in Old Testament, and the prophets were central to their teaching. But I majored in college in sociology, and my major sociology teacher was really a Christian prophet. He knew a lot of sociology, but he also had this incredible passion for justice, and I think I was into that before I got to the Old Testament prophets. The other thing is that my father was a very poorly paid preacher. It's hard to say, poorly paid preacher. And I think that led me very early to justice questions, because I knew early on that he was being treated unjustly. And I think that's the trajectory of my life from that, which of course fit very well with the prophets then when I finally got to them. Yeah.
What would you say from kind of that college and seminary experiences forward have been key, either intellectual, let's take it maybe in two parts, key intellectual turning points for you? What kind of philosophical or theological significant turning points have informed you, and how did that happen? Yeah. And second, what are key turning points perhaps personally in your own experience, in your own faith experience?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the tradition of Reinhold Niebuhr. He was in the same German sect that I was in, and I can remember as a college sophomore, I read Moral Man and Immoral Society, and it was so shocking to me that I sat down and read it again, and that was a huge wake-up call. Then when I was a young teacher, I got on St. Louis radio for a call in about Vatican II, about which I knew nothing. And a phone call.
You're calling into?
No, I'm answering.
Oh, you're.
I've developed,
it's getting
I've
worse
developed
as
that
we
skill
go.
very well of answering questions about which I know nothing. And a call came in saying, "What do you think of the Vatican document on religious liberty?" which was huge. And I said, in my ignorance, I think it's really nice for Catholics to think about that. During the commercial break, I was with an Episcopal priest named Murray Kinney. He said to me, "You know, you got to get off your pad. You can't answer questions like that." And that was a huge moment. I think I've been trying to get off my pad ever since. And the other thing, in response to your question, when I started reading Paul Ricoeur, I doubt whether I ever understand anything that Paul Ricoeur writes, but I make my own judgments, and I really
get your second naivete.
That's correct, yeah. All that. But what I got from Ricoeur, he had a little essay on Jesus' parables as an act of imagination. That opened the door for imagination for me, and that's been major for me since then. Yeah.
As I was pulling this together this morning, reflecting on stuff I've been looking at over the last couple of weeks, I remembered Aquinas' contention that one of the ways Jesus' kingship differs from Pilate's notion of empire is that Jesus insists truth is greater than power. That ultimately truth triumphs over all power. And Pilate, of course, says, well, what is truth?
Yeah.
And in your most recent book, or one of your most recent books, a couple in the last year, of which none of us are envious or cynical ourselves, in your book, Truth, great title, Truth Telling as Subversive Obedience, you say, quote, "The utterance of truth is grossly unwelcome among us." How have you experienced that? How have you seen that?
Well, I've had people walk out during my lectures. I think, on the one hand, the truth of the scandal of the cross is a truth none of us welcome. He bids us come die with him, for God's sake. But the truth that our socioeconomic military system has failed is, I don't know many pastors who can say that. So I just think that we all, in our society, we are seduced into a cocoon of American exceptionalism, and we simply will not tolerate anyone calling that into question. And I think that my experience is that liberals are a bit more cool about the way they resist than hot-headed conservatives, but it's the same resistance. I think we are all enveloped in that kind of thing, and I think the scandal of the cross on the one hand and the failure of the imperial system on the other hand are back-to-back truths, and we don't want to hear either one of them. When I say them, people don't want to hear them, but when I'm honest about it, I don't want to hear about it either. And I just think it contradicts the way we have tried to organize our life. And I don't want to be disturbed about that. That's what I think.
I saw in an essay you had written on Ezekiel where you noted that in people not wanting to speak the truth or play with the truth, you noted that the condemnation in Ezekiel doesn't come at the what we might call the political powers, doesn't come at the military, but it comes at the so-called religious people.
Who have whitewashed
who have
things.
whitewashed it.
That's right.
So a lot of times what we like to do is we want to talk about people out there, but Ezekiel reminds us, no, it's actually we that don't really want to speak the truth.
Right. Yeah, and I just think we're all implicated. Yeah. Same thing as in Jeremiah's trial. It's the priests and the prophets that want to execute him, and the civil authorities insist on due process. Yeah.